Everybody, this is Perch. I've done videos about done in one and kind of story arcs, and then issues that feel like filler at times. And in the era of decompressed storytelling, I think a lot feels like filler some of the time, and it does. It's kind of like, and by the way, this isn't just a U.S. comics thing. Like if you go to manga, and I love One Piece. You all know I love One Piece. The season where they or the arc where basically they get to meet Chopper, and we find out about Chopper's origin story and the doctor who wanted to have rose petals, like cherry blossom coming from the snow, and the amount of flashbacks and filler, and oh my God, so much filler. Fishman Island, tons of filler. So it's not just U.S. comics, but lots of places can do it. But anyway, here's a mail from a viewer talking about filler and other things. It says, Perch, your rock don't change, thank you. Remy here with a fun topic, filler. I've come to know this cruel mistress all too well in the past decade. I know I should be of the mind that it's not really important, but I feel like the necessity of this stuff is really just ignored. When I first went through watching Naruto, one of my brothers, he's 27, I'm 30, let me know all the episodes that were filler in Shippuden, so I decided to skip them at that time. But going back to rewatch last year, I decided to watch the filler and came to regret not doing so in the first go. I guess the question is, when does filler become a burden rather than a breather for the story? After watching your video on Kenobi, I have been thinking about this. This show has big filler energy just oozing out of it. Kenobi's creative team decided to ignore the filler created by Kieran Gillen, which I loved, or really any of the most recent Vader stuff from Marvel. Instead, it felt like a bunch of scenes were made around one-liners that come from finding a MacGuffin that introduces a new contrivance in order to lead us to member berries disguised as Easter eggs. That's pretty dead on what that show is, to be honest. Again, that's why I don't really get people who are really pissed about it. I know you've explained it in the comments. I mean, plenty of you have given your reasons, but to me, it doesn't rise to the level of getting annoyed, because it does feel like this kind of I don't know, exactly that. It's one-liners, basic MacGuffin type characters that appear out of nowhere, gets them to the next scene. Anyway, we could have gotten the relationship building between Bail and Leia as something new. Maybe have Luke come close with Lars, while Obi-Wan influences the people around Luke in order to protect him. In doing so, he draws attention to himself via the Force, and he attracts the eager-eyed Vader. They could have been riffing on the fact that the Emperor was severely disappointed in Vader after he failed so utterly in his battle with Obi-Wan, so Vader is angry and dangerous, just hunting down Jedi with no prejudice. Just building up that Vader-Sidious dynamic even a little bit would have been a great show in and of itself. Instead, we got lame filler that felt disingenuous as fuck. Now back to regular scheduled program. With comics being the way they are, I can't just skip the filler and get the whole story, even if Zach says you can read the first and last issue of any miniseries these days and get the same experience. You can't. I do hard disagree with that. And I'll give it to you from a different direction. Some miniseries are just bad. And if you read the first and last issue, you get the same experience. I mean, if you're saying the entire experience sucks, then sure, but you don't need to read the first and the last issue. You can read just the last issue, or you can read a middle issue. It really doesn't matter at that point. If the story is poorly constructed, you just don't read some random aspect of it, and it sucks, and you've got it. You've got the feeling of it. Anyway, we're going to get more into filler here in a second, but let me finish the mail. It says, it's almost as if we could have just come to accept that, yes, this story could have been 1 or 2 issue arc in the main title, but you're going to pay anyway, so F you. At least with manga, I don't have to go buy 4 titles, not on my pull list if I want the whole storyline. Well, that's true. Thanks for the honest, polite takes, and sorry for the length of the email. You may use my name if you decide to make a video on the subject. Sincerely, Rami. Thank you, Rami. If I pronounce it wrong, Rami. Sorry, and I can roll the R. Rami. Very nice. I'll do my best. Now you're laughing at my dumbassery. Okay, so I think filler can be important if, and that's where I think the word filler is wrong. So as much as I love One Piece, and as much as I do believe that Chopper flashback endless stuff was filler and was annoying and did go on and on and on, if you skipped all the episodes in One Piece that were filler, if you ignored them, you wouldn't have the same attachment to the show. It wouldn't feel as good. It wouldn't come across as good. Yes, a lot of those scenes go on and on and on. Yes, the flashbacks gets excessive and everything else. But, and I've done this with series too, like you said with Naruto, I've tried to just ignore those things. And what you get is a less interesting show. You get something that you don't have the same attachment to the characters. Sometimes, and it sucks, and this is kind of the nature of decompression, sometimes you need to let those moments breathe. And they play out. It's like the X-Men, and a lot of people talk about the baseball scenes in the X-Men. And I think they misunderstand at least some of what Claremont was doing there. Definitely they were designed as a breather, or in wrestling terms, kind of the come down match after you have a really hot match and you want to get the audience kind of re-energized before you get to the main event. By the way, I've never bought, and I still don't buy that concept in wrestling. I understand why they do it. I understand what they're going for. I just don't believe it's necessary. If you have a 2-hour pay-per-view, it's 2 hours. Do you really need a 5-minute comedy come down match before the main event to give proper attention to John Cena, Roman Reigns, whatever you're doing? I don't think you do. I think you just go high octane. Just try it for once. Just try going no breathers, just balls to the wall. I think wrestling should try that once in a while. But anyway, uh, with comics, I think there's definitely some comics that are pure filler. And Claremont, as much as I revere him, and he's great, there definitely were comics that were that way in the X-Men. He had filler that was just pure filler, comics that really had 0 point whatsoever. And then there are other comics, and the one that gets picked on, and I think it's because a lot of the current writers or people in comics, they do not understand kind of what was going on there. The Australian arc had a lot of filler moments to build up the incoming threat of Madeline Pryor as the Goblin Queen and everything that happened with Inferno, to build up the Reavers, to build up the X-Men who had kind of almost seized victory but had to be outlaws and then had to get torn down again. There were a bunch of elements in there. The breathers, the filler, were pretty important to setting the mood, to lulling the audience in some cases into a sense of security before you could reveal the next act. And I think that there is some real importance there. Filler, if it serves the purpose of providing depth and complexity to the characters in the situation, is valuable. It is meaningful. It can actually take you somewhere. It can actually do something for you. And I think it gets underserved and underrepresented in comics as, well, it's just filler. It's not that important. But if it's giving you a greater attachment to these characters, then it's not filler at all. That's the wrong word for it. And I think that there's a decent amount of that in comics that can get really great writers can give you a sketch into the life of the character or the situation or the villain. And it feels like nothing was really accomplished except something massive was accomplished in that it tied you closer together to the protagonist or to the characters, to the situation. It made you care about it a little bit more. And so then when the big guns come out, when these stories happen that are huge and big, they matter. The impact is big. A comic that a lot of people discussed as filler was this Christmas story. Kitty Pryde is at the X Mansion, and the aliens are there, and it's this kind of Kitty runs amok in the mansion, and there's villains there and everything else. And people, for many years, commented on that as a Chris Claremont filler story. But it wasn't. It connected you to Kitty Pryde, this new character, allowed you to get some depth and some complexity. It was a way to actually set up things that they wanted to do with Kitty and the relationship and kind of the dynamic that would play out over the next 10 years in his story. It wasn't the best story by a mile. It wasn't any kind of amazing writing, but I think it's incorrect to call it filler. On the other hand, if you look later in Chris Claremont's run, if you look at kind of some of the comics post the Fall of the Mutants, post the Australian arc, when Storm was a little girl and Gambit, there's stories there that definitely are filler. So, but again, a lot of this is in the matter of opinion. It is. I think back to the comment about the miniseries. I mean, the problem is if you're feeling that way about a miniseries, that you can read the first issue and the last issue, you got the whole story, then you probably shouldn't have had a miniseries to begin with, or maybe, like you said, just do 2 issues. But I have to question if the entire concept of the comic is worthwhile at all. If we're that place, if you could basically miss major parts of it and still come off with the same impact to you as a reader, then I think I don't do the comic at all. It's not that you should shorten it; it's that you never were able to establish any kind of emotional connection or resonance to the characters or to the situation, and as a result, you just have a confusing soup of crap that nobody cares about. That's what That's a lot of the comics today, to be honest with you. And it feels like the editorial is off, asking for pitches into stories that, I mean, God, the writers have to know there's no useful thing in that story. There's no useful point. But somewhere along the line, they're like, well, this is something they won't expect, and so they greenlight something that nobody wants. I would argue. Do you remember this very brief World of Wakanda series that was going to come out there, and it was Ta-Nehisi Coates was going to put it out, and he was working with, was it Roxanne Gay, or who was he working with? He was working with somebody to put out this World of Wakanda, and he had just more or less come on to Black Panther, and he announced, I'm going to be doing massive world building, and we hadn't seen that complexity to Black Panther before, so it wasn't like, you're not reading that first issue going, this is an amazing comic, but at least you're like, well, he's doing stuff, he's making you read. I mean, it's a better, this is better. Well, better than what he would do with Cap. But I mean, there's something here. And so they took that tiny little glimmer of, well, maybe there's a bigger world here that maybe over the next 20 issues or so we'll get to explore, and it'll be interesting. And they're like, quick, greenlight a miniseries. All right, I think World of Wakanda is actually, I think that thing was greenlit as an ongoing series, and what, it was canceled after 2 issues. And the reality was there was never any meat on the bone to tell that story in the first place. It wasn't that it was a filler. It was excessive. They hadn't even set up the foundation in the first title before they went running off to do the second. And that's I think that you get into a lot of that with, particularly with the big two. But I'll say I'm saying kind of multiple things. I'm saying this in defense of filler. Filler comics, if they're setting a mood, if they're giving you depth into the character, maybe they aren't moving the main plot along, but they're allowing you to see a nuance and a complexity to these characters that are going to play off really well in future issues, or maybe a different writer will play it off. There was that whole Jim Lee, Chris Claremont, Wolverine, Black Widow, and Captain America story told in the past. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, if you look at that issue and you look at what was going on in the X-Men during the time, that comic was filler. But, of course, it wasn't, because we got to learn more about the relationship between these characters, more about their first meeting. It provided kind of more interest to the kind of legacy and lore of Wolverine and what he was up to. It's an issue that a lot of people love, and it doesn't hurt that Jim Lee's killing it on art, but it's a good, solid comic. It's filler by the nature of the word, but it winds up being very useful to the story. So filler can be okay. And then if filler doesn't feel okay, I think the problem is not the filler, it's the entire thing. The entire comic doesn't know what to do with the characters and doesn't know what to do with situations to make them interesting. Anyway, I'm sure y'all are going to have a much better point on all this than I will, so please let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.